So, welcome to LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I've got about 25 clips on a few topics for what I think should be a good show tonight. As always, this is my weekly broadcast of the best clips from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the corporate media here in the United States, along with a little political commentary and along with my commentary between the clips. And as usual, I'll be using clips from the Sunday morning news shows on the regular Big Five outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, plus some quasi-news clips from last night's Saturday Night Live on NBC. I'll mainly be talking about the Ukraine crisis again, and I'm also going to have a couple clips on that missing Malaysian airliner at the end, but first I wanted to start with several clips related to the Conservative Political Action Conference this week, or CPAC, where all the conservatives gathered for one of their first big events of choosing who their leadership's going to be through 2016. And the keynote speaker there was Sarah Palin. She praised Senator Ted Cruz, among others, and praised Ted Cruz's filibuster against Obamacare last year, including the part where he read from Dr. Seuss's Green Eggs and Ham, which Sarah Palin gave her own twist to, as I'll discuss after I show about a 2.5-minute clip of that right here.
There he was reading it on the floor of the Senate, and through airwaves, he was telling his kids, "I'm thinking of you, thinking of all our kids." And I have 5 kids. So reading Green Eggs and Ham over all those years to each one, man, you totally have it memorized by the time, especially by the time Trig was born. So I had to spice it up a bit. And little Trig, lucky little fella, his bedtime story, now it goes something like this. "I do not like this Uncle Sam. I do not like his healthcare scam. I do not these dirty crooks, or how they lie and cook the books. I do not like when Congress stills. I do not like their crony dills. I do not like this spying, man. I do not like, oh yes we can. Like this spending spree. We're smart, we know there's nothing free. I do not like reporter smug replies when I complain about their lies. I do not like this kind of hope, and we won't take it. Nope, nope, nope. I saw a couple lines on the internet on that, and I winged the other ones. Okay. But
I really love that last part there where she cites as her source, at least for some of it, is the internet. And as someone who makes videos and cites a lot of sources that are on the internet, it seems a little vague to me. And I was also surprised back at the beginning there that someone who seems so patriotic and pro-military would read a poem starting with the line, "I do not like you, Uncle Sam," which at least to me means that Sarah Palin is more about giving an entertaining performance than any ideological consistency. But Sarah Palin wasn't even on the ballot for the straw poll at the CPAC conference this week. And I actually, over from Meet the Press, I'm going to show you a little screen capture of the results from the straw poll at CPAC, and you can see the big winner was not Ted Cruz or even Chris Christie, but by about 20 points was Rand Paul. And I think one of the signs that Rand Paul is getting to be a big figure, and I'm going to show a clip later where Rand Paul was actually over on Fox News Sunday and was answered a question about whether he's the front runner. But I think one indication that he is one of the front runners, at least, is that his speech at CPAC actually got skewered over on Saturday Night Live. And this is Colin Jost, the guy who took over for Seth Meyers. I think he's the new head writer as well. And you can see he talked about this one part of the speech where, I'll show you the clip and then I'll talk about it afterwards.
While speaking at the Conservative Political Action Conference, Kentucky Senator Rand Paul criticized NSA privacy violations, asking, will we be like lemmings, rushing to the comfort of Big Brother's crushing embrace? Or will we be like Rand Paul, not quite understanding what lemmings do?
I guess that wasn't that big a skewering of Rand Paul. It was just like a small little joke about one of the ways, one of his metaphors that didn't quite make sense there. But he, like I showed, he won by about 20 points, and he was over on Fox News Sunday with Chris Wallace, and Chris Wallace actually asked him why it was that he thought that he won at CPAC, and I thought his answer was kind of interesting, and I'll show you that here.
2016.
Well, you know, the one thing about CPAC is it's just chock full of young people. There's young people everywhere. And I think young people, their lives sort of rotate and, disseminate. Everything goes out through their cell phone. And they're very aware of their privacy. And they don't think when the government tells them that the Fourth Amendment doesn't protect your cell phone, doesn't protect your records, they don't accept that. And so I think not only conservative young people from colleges and high school, I think young people across the country are fed up with a government that says, hey, the Fourth Amendment doesn't apply to your records, doesn't apply to your cell phone.
I want
to... So, yeah, I thought that was an interesting look at how Rand Paul is going to try to bring in new voters into the Republican Party, because watching his entire interview, it seemed to me he was mostly hitting on themes that were crossover themes that would get independents and even some Democrats, on Fourth Amendment privacy and, government out of control. And he wasn't really hitting on the more conservative themes, and maybe because he thinks he has that kind of wrapped up from the old Ron Paul groups, or I don't know, because, he certainly has his rivals for the conservatives, and one of those is Ted Cruz, Senator Ted Cruz, who was over on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, although Martha Raddatz was in for George Stephanopoulos this week. And the ABC reporter Jonathan Karl had this interview with Ted Cruz, and one of the things he did was he attacked Rand Paul's foreign policy, or he responded to a question about Rand Paul's foreign policy in a very negative way. And I want to show you that clip here.
Just days before Putin invaded Crimea, Paul said, quote, I think we need to have a respectful, sometimes adversarial, but a respectful relationship with Russia.
Senator Rand Paul said, some on our side are so stuck in the Cold War era, they want to tweak Russia all the time, and I don't think that's a good idea. What's your reaction to that?
I'm a big fan of Rand Paul. He and I are good friends. I don't agree with him on foreign policy. I think U.S. leadership is critical in the world, and I agree with him that we should be very reluctant to deploy military force abroad. But I think there is a vital role, just as Ronald Reagan did. When Ronald Reagan called the Soviet Union an evil empire, when he stood in front of the Brandenburg Gate and said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall, those words changed the course of history. The United States has a responsibility to defend our values.
Senator Paul agreed to be interviewed on This Week to give his perspective. And at the last minute, he backed out.
So, yeah, he backed out of This Week with George Stephanopoulos, but he was over on Fox News Sunday, and I'll show a response from him in a minute. But first, I want to show one more of the non-isolationist Republicans, the internationalist wing of the Republican Party. And this is a split in the Republican Party that goes back to, World War I, World War II. It's a very long-term split in the Republican Party. And Peter King of New York, who is definitely an internationalist, made pretty much the same kind of criticism of Rand Paul when he was asked about it by David Gregory on Meet the Press over in this clip.
Now, the concerns that I have are still there. I mean, here's a person who said we're more concerned about the CIA killing Americans with drones as they're having coffee in Starbucks, who said that the Director of National Intelligence should be in the same jail as Snowden. I mean, this to me is scaring Americans. Our real enemy is al-Qaeda. We have to be concerned about Russia. He was being critical of Americans several weeks ago, he said we tweak the Russians too much. When I say he's appealing to the lowest common denominator, what he's doing, he's trying to somehow tell Americans we can retreat from the world, that America is an imperial power. If we retreated, the world would be safer. The fact is nothing can make the world more dangerous than if America did retreat, go back into isolationism. This is not the days of Charles Lindbergh. We have to be a strong and viable nation, and we cannot allow isolationists to take over the Republican Party, because that would be damaging not just to the party, more importantly to the country and the world.
All right, Peter.
So yeah, there you can see a couple Republicans, Senator Ted Cruz and Congressman Peter King, both attacking Rand Paul as being an isolationist. But Chris Wallace over on Fox News Sunday specifically asked Rand Paul about that, and he denied being an isolationist. He saw himself as following in the tradition of Ronald Reagan, and he also mentioned George H.W. Bush, which I thought was kind of an interesting role model to look toward. And I'll talk about it a little more after I show you Rand Paul's response to the criticism of him as an isolationist on Fox News Sunday here.
Well, I see my foreign policy in the same line as what came out of probably the first George Bush. Henry Kissinger wrote something in the Washington Post 2 days ago, which I agree with. I see it coming out of the mainstream of the Republican position. But the interesting thing is that I opposed with real fervor the involvement of us in Syria, and that became the dominant position in the country, both Republican and Democrat. There's not one Republican who's saying we should put military troops into Crimea or into Ukraine. So I think I'm right in the middle of that position, and I think those who would try to argue that somehow I'm different than the mainstream Republican opinion are people who want to take advantage for their own personal political gain. I'm a great believer in Ronald Reagan. I'm a great believer in a strong national defense. In fact, what Ronald Reagan said in about one sentence sums up really a lot of what I believe. He said to our potential adversaries, he said, don't mistake our reluctance for war for a lack of resolve. People knew that with Ronald Reagan. They still need to know that with the United States. And part of the problem is I think this president hasn't projected enough strength and hasn't shown a priority to the national defense. That is something that, were I in charge, I would.
So that sounds like a answer that's been rehearsed for a presidential run in terms of him not being an isolationist, but also noted that he also attacks President Obama as being weak, even though he said some statements that make him the target of weakness attacks from other Republicans. And another thing I thought was interesting, I mentioned before that some are calling him the front runner for the 2016 presidential election. And I want to show Chris Wallace asked him about that, first talking about a Washington Post column that called him the front runner, and then a CBS poll that puts him kind of neck and neck with former Florida Governor Jeb Bush, of all people. And I'll talk about that a little more after I show that clip here.
Columnist for the Washington Post this week rated you as the front runner for the Republican nomination in 2016. And in a poll of Republicans, you and Jeb Bush are out front when voters are asked who they would like to see run for president. And as well, we heard this week that you are pushing a bill in the Kentucky legislature that would allow you to run both for the Senate and for president in 2016. So I guess the question is it fair to say that when it comes to at least pursuing the possibility of running for president in 2016, that it's full speed ahead for you, sir?
We're definitely talking about it. My family's talking about it. We do the things that would be necessary to make sure that it can happen and will work. But I truly haven't made my mind up and won't make my mind up till after the 2014 elections. But, I haven't been shy about saying that we are thinking about it. I think that the message that I'm trying to promote, whether I do it or not, of bringing our message to minority voters, to people who have been persecuted throughout history, to young people who feel like the government's grown too big, I think it's a message that can grow the party, and the party's got to grow bigger or we're not going to win again.
So yeah, that sounded like a big yes to me, that yes, Rand Paul is running for president, although, I mean, I suppose maybe he hasn't made his final decision because he doesn't have to yet, but it does sound to me like he's going to be running for president. A lot of his answers sounded like he has a big plan to sort of assume that he has a lot of conservatives on his side already and pick out issues that are crossover issues. At least that's my interpretation of a lot of the answers I saw him give. And before I leave the whole CPAC issue, I want to talk about one more potential split in the Republican Party. And this had to do with a question that David Gregory on NBC's Meet the Press asked to Catholic Cardinal Timothy Dolan. I think is he Cardinal of New York? I think he's Cardinal of New York. But he was on and he was talking about Pope Francis. It's 1 year since the new liberal Pope has been brought in, and that's created a little bit of a split in the Republican Party, of all things, because when Pope Francis came out and saying some things about the excesses of capitalism, he got attacked by some Republicans, including Rush Limbaugh, who, of all things, called him a Marxist. And I want to show a clip of David Gregory asking Cardinal Timothy Dolan about that over on Meet the Press in this clip.
The other area of great potential influence is thinking about capitalism in the world. He'll meet with President Obama, and it's interesting that in this regard, the Pope and the President have been speaking about income inequality in the world. The President focused primarily in America. There are conservatives in America who say, no, there's not an income inequality problem. There's an opportunity inequality problem here. Commentator Rush Limbaugh even calling the Pope a Marxist. How does he respond to that? How do you respond?
Well, he responded very charitably, as we've come to know and love in him. I don't know if I'd have that much charity. I think that was terrible hyperbole to refer to the Pope as Marxist and very inaccurate. What we try to do, David, and the Catholic wisdom is always right smack down the middle. We use the two Latin words via media, right down the middle. We're always concerned about excesses on the left, which is collectivism, socialism, communism, and excesses on the right, which is unfettered, cutthroat capitalism. Somewhere in between is the via media, which will come to a fair, equitable, just economic system. Different popes have corrected either side. John Paul, as you might imagine, coming from where he did, he was a bit more sensitive to the excesses on the left. Francis, he's a bit more sensitive about the excesses to the right, but that's fine. I think they're both pointing us to a balance, a via media, a prudential way that allows freedom in the marketplace, economic prosperity, people to take care of themselves and their families, but yet protects the rights of the poor and those without. Somewhere in between those two, there's the answer. He's shrewd enough to know I'm not an economist. My job is to preach the gospel, biblical values, and to be a prophet, calling people somewhere between those two excesses. And once again, I think he's doing a masterful job.
In our
So yeah, I thought that was an interesting answer, and I don't know how it's going to affect the Republicans that there's a more liberal pope, and that they have a lot of their base is, I mean, they have some Catholics in their base, although there are also a lot of liberal Catholics who vote Democrat. So I'm not sure how that's going to play in the Republican Party, but I thought that was an interesting reaction from a real social conservative to Rush Limbaugh's attack on the Pope as a Marxist. Anyway, those are my clips on CPAC and the conservative movement and the sort of split that's going on there, or some possible rivalries that are coming up for all the way through the 2016 presidential election. But I also want to show a lot of clips on the ongoing Ukraine crisis. That's been the main topic where I've shown most of the clips for the past couple weeks, and now there have been new developments, of course, since last Sunday. Now it looks like there's going to be a referendum in the Crimean Peninsula to 1 week from today, next Sunday, where the population is going to vote to see if they want to join with Russia. And there's a lot of people complaining about that, saying it's unconstitutional. And then, of course, the Russians say that the deposing of the pro-Russian president of the Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych, was unconstitutional. And there's, of course, all these Russian troops in the Crimean Peninsula that Vladimir Putin, as recently as just a few days ago, refused to admit were even Russian troops. And there's a lot of attacks on President Obama as being weak. I even made a video that I uploaded on last night. Was it last night? I think so. Finally got it uploaded last night on how Fox News is blaming the Russian troops in the Ukraine on Obama's weakness, which is kind of silly. And I actually think that one of the reasons that this has happened is because of the U.S. not being able to have any moral authority about saying you can't invade countries. And I pointed that out last week when I showed some clips of John Kerry. There was one clip where he said, you can't invade a country on false pretenses. And anyway, I kind of enjoyed the intro to Saturday Night Live last night on that topic. They had Jay Pharaoh doing Barack Obama, talking about what's really causing his problems when he talks to Vladimir Putin on the phone. And I'm going to show you that clip real quickly here.
Thursday, I spoke with President Putin on the phone for an hour. It did not go well. I told him that one country can't violate international law by invading another country. And he spent the rest of our conversation pretending to sneeze while loudly saying, Iraq!
So, yeah, I think that is an important point, that one of the reasons we can't have any moral authority when we tell Putin he can't go into the Crimea to spread democracy in his neighborhood, which is his pretext, is because of what we did in Iraq. And of course, that didn't stop former Vice President under George W. Bush from going over on Face the Nation this morning and giving his opinions on the whole situation, including he was saying that President Obama, is his lack of credibility for not using military force in Syria is the real reason we're having this problem now. And I want to show you that clip here.
I think he is, but I also think he hasn't got any credibility with our allies. I just happened to speak to a couple of members of the European Parliament within the last couple of days who indicated that, the request for the Europeans to cooperate on sanctions is more difficult than it would have been because of what happened with respect to Syria, that in fact they got ready to go, and at the last minute the U.S. President Obama backed off. So he's got a much higher mountain to climb in order to try to mobilize European governments to come on board for something other than military action.
Former Secretary.
I have real problems listening to him and giving him any credibility on anything after he was vice president so disastrously in the Bush administration. And he won't even take responsibility for what Putin did while he was vice president. He actually kind of, how Putin also sent troops into Georgia and even took pieces of Georgia. And that's one of the things that most undermines the Republican argument that Obama's weakness is what caused Putin to do this, because Putin did the same thing in Georgia when George W. Bush was president. But you can see Dick Cheney try to kind of shift that all onto Obama because it happened in 2008 over in this clip.
But as you know, in Georgia, the people will make the case that Russian troops remained, and that it was a very different situation because we did not or were not able to respond more.
Right.
So what is that lesson of that?
Well, the lesson
in
of
your
that,
own
I
administration.
think, the lesson of that, I think, it came at a time sort of at the end of the Bush administration, the beginning of the Obama administration, but it was of deep concern to our friends in Western Europe. We did take some steps in terms of providing assistance to Georgia. We had ships in the region and so forth. So there were steps taken, but they weren't effective in terms of driving Putin out. And part of the problem in that case, there was a question about who actually provoked whom with respect to the Georgians.
Do you believe sanctions?
Of course, Putin's also trying to obscure or trying to make it difficult to determine who provoked who here, you know, saying that the president, Viktor Yanukovych, was taken down by a coup, and that, you know, there's all this propaganda about the pro-European Union forces in the Ukraine being Nazis, and so I thought that was a really disingenuous answer from Dick Cheney, especially trying to shift the responsibility for reacting to what Vladimir Putin did in Georgia over to President Obama, even though it took place when George W. Bush was still in office. So I want to show that clip, and before I leave the Dick Cheney clips, I'm going to show one more bogus attack on President Obama from Dick Cheney, where he says that Obama took the military option off the table, even though if you watch LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup last Sunday, you'll be able to see a couple clips from John Kerry specifically saying all options are still on the table. And of course, no one is talking about direct military action anyway, and the options that Dick Cheney gives are not options, I think, that have been ruled out by President Obama's administration anyway. But anyway, I'll show you the clip and talk a little bit more about it afterwards here.
Today?
Well, I think I worry when we begin to address a crisis by the first thing we do is take options off the table. I don't think the administration should do that.
Have they done that?
In the sense saying that no military. He seems to operate that way most of the time. There are military options that don't involve putting troops on the ground in Crimea. We could go back and reinstate the ballistic missile defense program, where it was taken out. It was originally going to go in Poland, Czech Republic. Obama took it out to appease Putin. We could do training exercises in Poland, joint exercises. We can offer military assistance in terms of equipment, training, and so forth to the Ukrainians themselves. So
there's some activation.
So, yeah, you notice at the beginning there that he said that President Obama took the military option off the table, which he never really did. And you can watch clips from my show last week where Secretary of State John Kerry specifically said all options are on the table. And I don't think they've ruled out any of those options he talked about there. But I also want to show, you know, Dick Cheney isn't actually in office, and even his daughter is no longer running for Senate from Wyoming. So I don't know exactly how much influence he has on the party, but all those things he just talked about were also advocated over on Meet the Press by Representative Peter King, who is, like I said, one of the internationalist, you know, pro-military and especially pro-NSA and anti-Islamic Republicans. He's from New York. He had some hearings a while back on like the threat from Islam in the United States. But I want to show a clip of him basically giving all the same get tough actions he wants the United States to take that Dick Cheney also just talked about in that last clip, to show that it seems to be an important talking point, at least to some in the Republican Party, and you can see that clip here.
I think we have to make it clear there will be firm sanctions. I think we should freeze the assets of any of the Russian oligarchs in this country, people close to Putin. We have to increase military support for the Baltic states, increase military support for Poland and Hungary, and make it absolutely clear that these sanctions are going to be enforced. And we have to make sure the allies are working together. We have to make tough, ironclad sanctions on Russia. There's no silver bullet. We have to sustain it and keep it going. But I think the first thing to hit home will be to freeze the assets of Russian oligarchs and top Russians in this country and throughout the Western world.
So yeah, you can see Peter King, Republican congressman from New York, is saying a lot of the same things Dick Cheney said, and then he also has all these economic isolation actions he wants to take against Russia. But a lot of those things the Obama administration is already talking about. In fact, they had someone from the Obama administration went out on a couple of the shows. The Deputy National Security Advisor, Tony Blinken, and you can see him not only talk about the same economic ways to isolate Russia that Peter King was just talking about, but he also makes the argument that I think was getting kind of short shrift on the shows the last couple of weeks about how what Putin is doing doesn't show Putin's strength, but actually shows Putin's weakness, which I'll talk a little more about after I show his Deputy National Security Advisor, Tony Blinken, from the Obama administration on Meet the Press, talking to David Gregory here.
David, first, if there is a referendum and it votes to move Crimea out of Ukraine and to Russia, we won't recognize it, and most of the world won't either. That's fact one. Second, were that to happen, the isolation of Russia, the cost that it would pay, would increase significantly from where they are now. But you have to step back and put this in a larger context. What's happened is this. Russia had a government in Ukraine that it supported and that started to take very aggressive action against its own people. That government is gone. A government that's more oriented toward the rest of the world and toward the West is in place. And so what you're seeing is, I think, Putin acting from a position of weakness, concern that Ukraine was leaving Russia's orbit. The bottom line, though, is that it doesn't have to be in anyone's orbit. If Ukraine succeeds economically, politically, integrated with the world, that would be good for Russia and good for Ukrainians.
So yeah, there you can see the Deputy National Security Advisor from the Obama administration talking about how this is more about Putin's weakness than Obama's weakness, and also saying he's going to isolate the Russians. But I actually want to show another clip from Ted Cruz, and he's really putting forward this Republican talking point that's been pretty rampant from almost everyone in the Republican Party, that this is all about Obama's weakness. I think the only one I showed Adam Kinzinger last week, a Republican congressman who said, you know, we have to pull together at this time, and I think Marco Rubio has been a little bit more for, you know, U.S. Bipartisan unity in foreign policy, but pretty much every other Republican I've seen has been savagely attacking President Obama as the cause, you know, his weakness being the cause of this problem. And I want to show Ted Cruz making that argument pretty forcefully in his short appearance over on This Week with George Stephanopoulos, interviewed by reporter Jonathan Karl in this clip.
A critical reason for Putin's aggression has been President Obama's weakness. That Putin fears no retribution. Their policy has been to alienate and abandon our friends and to coddle and appease our enemies. And so Putin, you better believe, Putin sees in Benghazi 4 Americans are murdered and nothing happens. There's no retribution. You better believe that Putin sees that in Syria, Obama draws a red line and ignores the red line.
Okay, so how would you stand up? What would you do? Military action?
No, look.
None at all. Sanctions? Would you do sanctions?
Absolutely, yes. There are a host of things we can do. Let's rewind the clock a little bit. Number one, don't demonstrate weakness for 5 years.
What I like about that clip is it seems like Senator Ted Cruz is saying that the reason Putin is invading or sending troops into the Crimean Peninsula is because he's been watching Fox News and seeing all these scandals that Obama is involved in. It's Benghazi. That seemed kind of ridiculous to me. And I want to show another clip of the Deputy National Security Advisor, Tony Blinken. He was over, this is also from NBC's Meet the Press, and David Gregory actually specifically asked him about whether President Obama had laid down these red lines and then allowed people to cross them, and that's why Vladimir Putin was comfortable sending troops into the Crimean Peninsula. And I'll show this is the Obama administration is getting better at answering that question than they have in the last couple of weeks, at least from Tony Blinken, I think, in this clip.
This started. The president and his top officials have issued, it seems like, line after line, and Putin seems to have crossed them all. Why does this president and the United States generally have so little influence over him?
Well, David, I think what we've seen is the president mobilizing the international community in support of Ukraine, to isolate Russia for its actions in Ukraine and to reassure our allies and partners. We've seen the President put together a major international support package. He's invited the Ukrainian Prime Minister, Yatsenyuk, to come to the White House on Wednesday to further demonstrate that support and to consult with him. And in terms of isolating Russia, what we've seen as a result of the mobilized support is that the financial markets in Russia have hit lows. The ruble has hit a low. Investors are wondering whether to get involved in Russia because of the instability, and all of that is exacting a real cost and a real consequence.
But let me, I just want to go back. I just want to challenge you on this point, because my question is, we've said don't do this or else, and President Putin keeps doing it and more. So why doesn't the president have a greater ability to influence what Putin does before he does it?
The president's made clear, and so have leaders from around the world, including in Europe, where we're closely coordinated, that Russia has a choice going forward. It can continue down the path it's on and face much greater isolation and much greater cost, or it can take the opportunity to resolve this diplomatically in a way that addresses its concerns but restores Ukraine's sovereignty.
Right, but
That's
he's not listening. He's not.
So I guess that's an okay answer. Basically, he's saying that the consequences are still in the future, I guess, for Russia, but there are consequences, and the Obama administration is marshaling the international community, and there may be some problems with that I'll get to in a minute, but what I think Tony Blinken has really gotten better at, or the Obama administration has gotten better at arguing, as demonstrated by Tony Blinken's appearances, is his appearance over on CNN State of the Union, where he was talking about in more detail that what Vladimir Putin is doing is showing his weakness, not President Obama's weakness, and giving more of the context. And I actually talked about this a little in my latest edited produced video, which I think you can see. Oh wait, no, over in the sidebar over there you can see my video. Fox News blames Obama for Russian troops in Ukraine, and but here's a pretty good answer from Deputy National Security Advisor Tony Blinken to Candy Crowley on CNN State of the Union about why the Ukraine crisis shows Putin's weakness and not Obama's weakness over in this clip.
Last part particularly, that critics have suggested across the board, certainly a lot of Republicans, but as I mentioned, Senator Coons is a Democrat, saying that Putin sensed weakness in the president. Your reaction?
Oh, I think Putin's seen exactly the opposite. What Putin has seen is the president mobilizing the international community, both in support of Ukraine and to isolate Russia for its actions in Ukraine. And Russia is paying a clear cost for that. That's what Putin's seeing. Putin is not acting out of a position of strength. He's acting out of a position of weakness. Understand what's happened here. This has gone on for several months now. A country that had a government that the Russians supported and that was taking aggressive action against its own people has left. A government that is more oriented toward the West has come in, and that's what Putin was afraid of. And as a result, what we've seen now is the international community mobilized against the actions he's taken as a result of the president's leadership. And so I think what you're seeing is the United States leading in this effort and the president doing the leading. The notion that this is somehow a result of Syria makes very little sense to me. This is about Ukraine. This is about what the Russians saw happening in Ukraine.
The suggestion is that the president looked weak in Syria, he's looked weak in other places, and Putin took advantage of that.
Well, you know, history really doesn't bear that out. The Russians went into Georgia and took over territories there under the Bush administration when there were hundreds of thousands of American troops deployed in Iraq and Afghanistan. Of course, that didn't stop the Russians from going in. That's because this is not about what we do or we say in the first instance. It's about Russia and its perceived interests. And we have made very clear now that there's a choice that Russia has to make and a cost it will pay if it continues down this path. I think the impact, again, of what we've already done in terms of the pressure on Russia has been significant. It will grow stronger. But it's also the responsible thing to do to figure out if we can resolve this in a diplomatic way, and that's why we've offered a path forward that would take into account Russia's concerns. We've long said that we respect and understand its ties to Ukraine,
Gotcha.
But it cannot change the status quo through the use of force.
Yeah, I think that was definitely a better answer and went into more detail about Putin's weakness and how what President Obama is doing isn't the way it's being portrayed by the Republicans and Fox News. But one of the most interesting points, and I have seen some other people make this point, but I didn't see anyone else on the Sunday morning shows this morning, came from Senator Rand Paul, Republican, and I can't really disagree with his point about how taking over the Crimea may actually hurt Vladimir Putin's goals for the overall Ukraine. And I'll talk a little bit more about that after I show this clip. This is Senator Rand Paul over on Fox News Sunday talking to Chris Wallace, also talking about the weakness of Vladimir Putin here.
This is what you said. Unless we are willing to go to war for Ukraine, and I believe that would be unwise, Russia, without question, has the military might and geographic advantage to control the Crimea and the Russian-dominated areas of Ukraine. Senator, it sounds like you have given up on ever getting Crimea out of the clutches of the Kremlin.
Well, actually, the rest of that essay went on to say that if Russia acts like a rogue nation, they'll be isolated from the West. They will bear a burden with trade, with isolation from the community of civilized nations. But also, I think there's something very interesting. If they continue to occupy Crimea, if they annex Crimea, Ukraine almost certainly will come completely within the Western orbit. So it will backfire on them because you'll be taking Russian-speaking voters that have been voting for Russian-speaking presidents of Ukraine, you'll be taking them out of the population. That country's almost evenly split. But if you take the Russian speakers in Crimea out of Ukraine and you're left with Ukraine, what you'll see is the Western-oriented candidates are going to win every time. The other thing is Putin needs to be warned, and I'm perfectly willing to tell him that if he does occupy Ukraine, it'll be chaos for him and for the world. If he creates a Syria out of Ukraine, what's going to happen is 80% of his oil and gas is going through Ukraine. It'll be a disaster for him, and so he needs to be fully aware of that.
So yeah, I think that's a really important point that because the nation of the Ukraine, or Ukraine, is about evenly split between the pro-Russian population and the pro-European Union population, that if you take Crimea out of the Ukraine, which it's about 60% Russian, that you're going to shift that balance so that in the rest of the Ukraine, there's never going to be a pro-Russian leader who can win a democratic election. Now, there are possibly other ways that Vladimir Putin can try to affect the rest of the Ukraine other than the Crimea, but it's really his long-term goal not to control the Crimean Peninsula, where he already had this base and already had, a lot of pro-Russian population and some autonomy. His real goal is to try to control the whole of the Ukraine, or at least have a pro-Russian government in the Ukraine. And I want to show a clip from former Defense Secretary Robert Gates. He was Defense Secretary for George W. Bush and for President Barack Obama. And he first spent some time talking about what he kind of explained Vladimir Putin's long-term plan to Chris Wallace, and I'll show you that clip here.
This is what you said. Unless we are willing to go to war for Ukraine, and I believe that would be...
Oops, sorry about that. That was the clip I just showed here. Here is the Robert Gates, former Defense Secretary clip right here.
Well, Chris, I think it's part of a long-term strategy on Putin's part to recreate a Russian sphere of influence and a Russian bloc where Russia has economic, political, and security relationships with these countries that make them all lean toward or do the bidding of Moscow. And we saw it first in Georgia in 2008. We've seen it in him breaking off the EU discussions with Armenia. We've seen him do the same thing in Belarus. So, he may retreat tactically from time to time, but this is part of a longer-term effort to stop the expansion of NATO, but more importantly, bring the states of the former Soviet Union back under the influence of Moscow. And frankly, I don't think that he will stop in Ukraine until there is a government in Ukraine, in Kiev, that is essentially pro-Russian.
So yeah, there's Robert Gates saying that he thinks that Vladimir Putin's long-term goal is to get a pro-Russian government in the Ukraine, but the big admission, or I think the big soundbite from Robert Gates on Fox News Sunday came in his answer a little later, when he said that he thinks Crimea is basically lost, and I couldn't quite figure out exactly how those two things went together, especially regarding what Senator Rand Paul said about how if Crimea is no longer part of the Ukraine, that actually frustrates Vladimir Putin's goal of having a pro-Russian government in the Ukraine, because as long as Crimeans are no longer part of the Ukraine, it shifts the balance as less pro-Russian. But you can see this sort of long answer from Robert Gates talking about, again, about Vladimir Putin's long-term goals in the Ukraine, and then at the end he gives this, soundbite about how he thinks that Crimea is going to be part of Russia and there's nothing we can do about it and it's gone. And I'll talk about it a little more after I show the clip here.
Possible annexation of Crimea, because earlier this week you said you did not think that Putin wanted to take part of Ukraine with all of its economic problems. As you said today, you thought that he wanted a Ukraine that looks toward Russia. Given the possible annexation, have you underestimated Putin's ambitions here, and is Crimea already gone?
Well, first of all, I don't think I've underestimated his ambitions. I think the strategy is as I have described. I don't think that he wants to recreate the Soviet Union precisely because he doesn't want to have responsibility for economic basket cases like Ukraine is at the present time. What he wants is for those governments to look to Moscow and basically subject to whatever Moscow wants without having responsibility for them. And so I think a pro-Russian government like Yanukovych, the ousted president, meets Putin's needs in terms of what he's after. Whether something like that can happen in the near to medium term, I don't know. But there's no question that the seizure of Crimea is an aggressive and illegitimate act. And I think what you're seeing here is a tactic where, the history of Crimea and the relationship with Russia and Ukraine is a complicated one, in the sense that Crimea was part of Russia until Khrushchev gave it to Ukraine in the early 1950s. Basically didn't make any difference then. And so I think the Russians see this as taking back territory that belonged to them, or that's the way they'll portray it, territory where the population is significantly Russian, very pro-Russian. And I think Crimea has strategic importance for Russia because of the Soviet or the Russian naval base, and it's also their only warm water port. So no question it's an aggressive, illegitimate act. The question is whether anybody can do anything about it. I think he does not want to send troops into eastern Ukraine. I think that he would prefer to achieve his goals without that kind of blatant use of military force outside of Crimea, and frankly, I'd be surprised if he did do that.
Secretary Gates,
but I do not believe that Crimea will slip out of Russia's hands.
You think Crimea is gone?
I do.
So yeah, that was the big soundbite at the end. That Crimea is gone, won't slip out of the clutches of the Kremlin. But the rest of his answer didn't really make sense, I didn't think, because I don't understand how annexing the Crimea or adding Crimea to the Russian Federation is going to further Vladimir Putin's supposed goal of getting a pro-Russian government in the rest of the Ukraine. It seems everything he's doing in Crimea is making his goal of a pro-Russian government in Kiev less likely. I don't know, maybe there's something I'm missing. You can tell me down in the comment section. I'm getting closer to the end here. I have a few more clips to show, but after I'm done showing all the clips, I'll see if I can get a little live discussion going on the topics that I've been discussing from... looks like I have well over 100 people watching, so I'll be getting to those comments in a moment. I want to show a couple more clips, about 4 more clips, 3-4 more clips on the Ukraine crisis. First, I want to show Paul Ryan, the vice presidential candidate on the Republican ticket in the last election in 2012. And he's another Republican who may be running for president. And I want to show how he gave his advice on how we need to put pressure on the oligarchs in Russia. And then he also made this argument about how U.S. being more open to drilling and energy exportation will help the problem, and I'll talk about that a little more after I show, I believe, this Paul Ryan over on Face the Nation, I think it was, on CBS in this clip.
I do think there are vulnerabilities within Russia that he has politically that can be exploited. I think we should consider targeting some of the oligarchs around him that are his enablers and he is their enablers. I think
How would you
we are a
target
country
them?
with
How
vast...
would you target them?
Well, I think you target their ability to travel. You target their international reserves. You target their holdings overseas that are illicitly gained through this kleptocracy of the Russian economy. One more point I'd say: we are a nation with vast energy reserves and potential, but with a government that is seen as hostile toward developing those energy reserves, let alone exporting those energy reserves. If our government changed its tune on that, if we told Europe, we are going to green light these languishing permit applications for exporting LNG, natural gas, to Europe, that could do a lot to send the signals that we are intent on loosening Russia's grip on its energy to Europe, and that we're going to be a reliable ally to loosen their grip. They get their money from petrol. About half their budget comes from energy. If we could compromise that by developing American energy, creating jobs here, lowering prices, I think that would be a huge step in the right direction. We're going to move on that in the House, and I think the president would have a great opportunity. Change tune, resets failed, missile defense, smart sanctions, energy.
So yeah, I don't know if the missile defense is really that big a deal, and the sanctions, I'm going to get to that in a minute. But the liquid natural gas thing, I mean, we do have a lot of natural gas here in the United States, but the problem is that, as I understand it, and maybe people in the comment section who have more expertise on natural gas can correct me if I'm wrong, but natural gas is kind of difficult to transport because in its natural state as a gas, you can send it in a pipeline, but then you need, you can't have a pipeline. I mean, I guess you could have a pipeline under the ocean, supposedly, but that would be like hugely expensive. So we can't have a pipeline like Russia has a pipeline. So if you want to transport it without a pipeline, you have to turn it into a liquid. That's the liquid natural gas, and I think it's like you got to bring it down to like negative 240 degrees Fahrenheit or something like that, and it's kind of expensive, and storing it is expensive, and it ends up costing a lot more if you're competing with someone who has a pipeline. So we're replacing a Russian pipeline natural gas with U.S. liquid natural gas. I'm not sure if that would work, so I wanted to point that out. And then there's also a problem with the sanctions. The trade between Russia and the European Union, it benefits both sides. That's what's so great about trade, but that means that when you try to impose sanctions, it's also going to hurt both sides. And I saw Republican Mike Rogers, who I don't agree with often, and I'm not even sure I agreed with everything he said, but he was over on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, which, as I said, was actually hosted by Martha Raddatz, and he talked about how there may be problems getting some of the Europeans to go along with really effective sanctions against Russia for that reason over in this clip.
Well, it gets a little interesting. So you'll have two sets of problems. On the diplomatic front, you'll have what does Europe do? You know, Germany is so tied to the Russian economy, both from energy and direct business connections and back into Russia. You've got some problems with sanctions and how that works out and how they can go forward without screwing up their own economy. Then you have this the notion of, if they do that, now you have a different legal status. And so some are charging that the Ukrainian overthrow in Kiev was illegal. That's the Russians' perspective, which would allow them, under their interpretation of the law, to have a vote to secede, the Crimean Peninsula to secede from the Ukraine, and Russia has already said in their parliament that they would accept them. So now you have a whole new different set of laws we're going to have to unwind in order to see where we can go from an international perspective.
So I think, though I don't often agree with Mike Rogers, I think he may be right about some difficulties getting the Europeans to go along with sanctions. But I know I have a lot of European viewers, and maybe some of them are live in the comment section now. If you can give me any insight into whether you think Germany or other European countries are so tied to trade with Russia that they won't be able to go along with sanctions that really hurt Russia, I mean, let me know about that. But I think that may be a reasonable argument as to why sanctions won't be a really good lever of foreign policy for the United States in the crisis in the Ukraine right now. But one other clip, or actually there are two more Ukraine clips I want to show. First, I want to show a clip from Andrea Mitchell, who I guess she's kind of a pundit, and I don't usually show pundit clips, but she's also a reporter, and she has a lot of good sources. This is over on, she's an NBC reporter, so this is over from Meet the Press, and she said a couple things about the whole Ukraine situation that I hadn't really heard from anyone else. She also talked about how she thought Europe wasn't going to help in the sanction regime first, and that's why I want to play the beginning of the clip. But then afterwards, she said some things about how things developed that I hadn't heard from anyone, and I'll discuss that a little more after I show the clip. This is David Gregory and Andrea Mitchell over on NBC's Meet the Press in this clip.
In fact, Putin has not agreed to direct talks with Ukraine. That's why the Ukrainian prime minister is coming here.
He's going to get love from the administration.
He's going to get love here and legitimacy here, but he can't get a meeting in Moscow.
Right.
The other thing is, there are reports that Russia is attacking Ukraine, the Kiev government, with cyber war, a very sophisticated Stuxnet-type cyber war that is going to completely, potentially cripple their attempts to revive their economy and their infrastructure. And you've got, you know, military moves. Crimea is effectively gone. I don't think that Germany and the rest of the Europeans are going to help the U.S. isolate Putin economically, and there is lobbying, intense lobbying from American businesses who have huge deals in Russia. They're worried about the blowback from sanctions. The sanctions against Russia will hurt them. So the president doesn't really have a play, and Lavrov, according to some really well-sourced reports, Lavrov, the National Security Council, and the economic advisors were clueless about Putin's decision. Putin made that decision with three old buddies from the KGB days in the 70s and 80s in Leningrad. Yes.
Lavrov, that's the foreign minister of Russia, who Andrea Mitchell from NBC, they were saying didn't know what was going to happen with these troops in the Crimean Peninsula. And the National Security Council she's talking about is Russia's National Security Council. So she's saying that her sources are telling her that Putin is kind of going rogue. He and his old KGB buddies are planning Russia's foreign policy without actually using the people. His foreign minister and his National Security Council aren't even involved, and that's a little disturbing. I mean, I don't know if it would be any better if those people were involved, but just the fact that it's like a old KGB group that's pulling the strings on here, and then she also backed up what Mike Rogers had said about Europe and Germany in particular not going along with the sanctions because it's going to hurt them. And I also had heard that thing about that Russia is engaging in cyber warfare against the Ukraine, like as bad as Stuxnet, which is that virus that destroyed some Iranian installations and I think maybe even killed people. I can't remember if the a computer virus actually blew stuff up and killed people, but I remember it destroyed some Iranian nuclear installations. If I'm remembering that right. But I want to show one more clip. This is from Martha Raddatz over on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. This is the kind of thing I would have expected from Fox News. This is like your be very afraid of what's going on. They did this little segment where they tied what was going on in Russia. They emphasized the threat of nuclear war, actually. And I want to show you, I'll talk about that a little more after I show you the clip here.
And just this weekend, a new reminder, a Russian military official hinting the Ukraine crisis may lead them to consider suspending inspections of the Russian nuclear arsenal.
That signal means to stop whatever you are doing and get to the nearest safe place fast.
That very real threat of nuclear war seems a long time ago. But watching developments this week, it was hard not to think about those bad old days of the Cold War. Russian troops on the march, the U.S. sending fighter jets to Eastern Europe, Vladimir Putin test firing an intercontinental ballistic missile. That ICBM, though unarmed, an especially sharp reminder that America still remains on alert for nuclear war.
Yeah, that did seem a little bit of an alarmist report, but actually, to be fair to Martha Raddatz, they transitioned there to this kind of interesting report on the 400 or so nuclear missile silos and the Air Force personnel who man them or woman them, I guess, because it's both genders were represented, I think, down there. But it's like these people who spend these 24-hour shifts waiting to be told to launch nuclear missiles, and they still exist. And it's kind of scary when you look at it. Kind of reminded me of the movie War Games from I think that was the 1980s. Yeah, like the early 1980s that showed they replaced all those missile silo people with like computers. And anyway, those are all the clips I want to show you about the whole Ukraine crisis. Before I get to looking at the comment section to see if I can get a little live discussion going, I have two quick clips I want to show on this Malaysian airliner crash. It was a flight from Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia going to Beijing, and I've been watching developments all day. Basically, it kind of disappeared. I mean, unless there's been breaking news since I started the show, it looks like they haven't found any wreckage. You know, there was one of the leads they had was some oil slicks, but they weren't sure if they were related to the airplane. And there was some reporting that it may have tried to turn right before it went down, but that might have been, just the fact that it was at the edge of the radar. And then they found some possible something floating, but so far nothing confirmed that I saw. But I want to show this clip from Peter King, who is always willing to tell people to be afraid. Speaking of the Martha Raddatz piece there on be afraid of nuclear weapons in the Ukraine crisis, here's Peter King saying, it's too early to tell, but there are a lot of reasons we should be afraid of terrorism because of this Malaysian airliner going down over in this clip.
David, it does. First of all, we don't know, but you're right. This is a real red flag, and there's a number of other factors. The fact that the plane just has disappeared, that there was no distress call, there was no mayday, there was no signaling at all of any trouble. The fact that it came out of Malaysia, which has been a hub for al-Qaeda activity. Prior to the attack on the USS Cole, there was a meeting in Malaysia. Virtually so many of the 9/11 hijackers went through Malaysia. So you put all that together and you have two people traveling with stolen passports on the same plane. This has to be looked at, and I can assure you that our intelligence people, our counterterrorism people are scrubbing, going through all the databases, trying to get the identification of those two who travel with the stolen passports. My understanding is we do have a facial identity, but we don't have the full identity yet. All of that has to be run to ground because, again, there's we can't not make any conclusions, but considering what's happened in the past and considering where this occurred and considering the stolen passports, we have to certainly consider the issue of terrorism and exhaust every possible investigative technique.
Oh yeah, that was the other fact that I forgot to mention in my introduction there, that at least two of the passengers were traveling on stolen passports. Of course, that doesn't mean they were terrorists. There are a lot of reasons people might be traveling on stolen passports, but that's something that they're focusing on. And I mean, I don't know how this is going to turn out, whether it's going to turn out to be terrorism or some catastrophic equipment failure or pilot error. I mean, who knows? But the last clip I want to show was an interesting fact about the whole thing that sort of points to either a bomb or some really catastrophic failure. This is air crash or air travel expert Richard Quest over on CNN's State of the Union, and he's talking about how the fact that there was no information about what happened pointing towards something really catastrophic happening, because when a plane is up at 30,000 feet after, an hour after takeoff, that's like the safest part of the flight, and there were no weather problems. And one of the things they pointed out on CNN is that these really sophisticated aircraft are transmitting all sorts of data all the time to, satellites and, air traffic control, and even to their own airlines. They have all this like mechanical data that they transmit for maintenance purposes. And there was like a total cutoff in the data, and that points to something really catastrophic happening, maybe a bomb, maybe not, and that's the last clip I'm going to show you. This is air travel or air crash expert Richard Quest on CNN's State of the Union with Candy Crowley in this clip.
Something man-made. I mean, it could have been a bomb or something like that.
Yes, I mean, we shouldn't be necessarily embarrassed by putting the word bomb on the table now, because that is in the milieu. That is, you've even got the CEO of Malaysia Airlines being asked about that. You've got people now quite openly speculating whether or not this could have been a device of some sort. We're a very long way from making any further conclusions on that. But the evidence of what we know so far is such. This plane stopped transmitting any information. It disappeared. It's clearly in many pieces. And the only sort of force that does that on an aircraft is dramatic, and it is very, very catastrophic. Because what it also has to do, Candy, it has to sever all electrics. It has to sever the airframe. It has to prevent, even with Air France 447 a few years ago, the plane continued to send out data right the way down to the ocean, to when it went into the ocean.
Richard Quest.
So yeah, I thought that was a kind of interesting fact about this airline crash. I don't know if it's going to turn out to be terrorism or mechanical failure or pilot error or whatever, but it seems like something really catastrophic happened at 30,000 feet because it didn't transmit any data. There was no radio traffic, although they say that pilots are trained first to like deal with flying the airplane and then navigating the airplane and then communicating. So communicating is like third on their list. So that may not mean anything, the fact that they didn't have any distress call. Anyway, I'm already well over an hour. I got a late start, but I think I'm well over an hour. But I do want to look in the comment section. It looks like I have 120 or 130 people who showed up to watch live, so I want to honor that and at least take a couple questions or comments from people. Oh, I see at the beginning Third Eye 2020 says, "Uh-oh, LV is that a 100,000 subscription plaque behind you? Why, yes it is. I just got this in the mail from YouTube this week, so I thought I would put it up. This is LiberalViewer. Congratulations on... Oops, I'm not getting that out. Congratulations for surpassing 100,000 subscribers from YouTube. I get this, like, silver play button plaque, so I thought I would put that up. I'm trying to get all my, like, cool YouTube stuff up behind me. Let me... see what other kind of questions I have. That wasn't really on topic, but I guess what's in the background. The Lizard Head says she sounds like a cartoon villain. I think that must have been Sarah Palin. Oh, green eggs and spam. I'm sorry. People are saying it was painful watching Sarah Palin. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. But, I like to show comedy clips at the beginning of the program. As my regular viewers know, comedy clips at the beginning is kind of a tradition with Liberal Viewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. And I did show a couple Saturday Night Live clips, but there was no Bill Maher, and I had to find some other source of comedy. So I thought I would show the Sarah Palin clip as the comedy. She was trying to be comedic there, but I also think there were a couple aspects of that were unintentional comedy. The hat tip to the internet, I thought that was kind of humorous. And then the whole thing, I don't like you, Uncle Sam. Since when is like pro-military? Anyway, I already said that earlier. But anyway, that's why I showed that clip. And let me see. Oh, there are people talking about how Rand Paul's reaching out to young people. Steve Enever says, young people read Wiki, right, Paul? Oh, I think that may be... a reference to Rand Paul's plagiarism problems, where he plagiarized Wikipedia. So, Amazed Satsuma says, too bad Daryl Issa wasn't in control of the audio controls for CPAC, because my ears can only take so much stupid. Oh yeah, Daryl Issa, who cut off Elijah Cummings at the big IRS scandal hearings this last week, where supposedly Lois Lerner was going to testify, and she took the Fifth Amendment, and Daryl Issa asked her all these questions, and she answered every question with, on the advice of counsel, I am going to invoke my Fifth Amendment rights. And then after Daryl Issa was finished, Elijah Cummings, the ranking Democrat on the committee, tried to make his statements, and Daryl Issa cut off his mic. And so, yeah, it was a big scandal. I didn't show any clips from that, but I guess it would have been good if Daryl Issa could have cut Sarah Palin off. I actually watched that entire Sarah Palin speech, and down in the video description, I have put a link to the entire Sarah Palin speech if anyone is that masochistic and also wants to watch it. I was watching it because I make these videos. I don't know if anyone of you has any real reason to watch the whole thing, but I put, actually this week I believe I have links to the sources of every single clip I've used down in the video description. If you're interested, you can watch the whole thing and see if you think I actually picked out the best clips. Let me see if I can scroll through here real quick and pick out one or two more comments. It looks like JRM 102 says Crimea has 2 million people in a country of 47 million. Well, I don't know. Even if you excuse me while I do a Marco Rubio. I don't know. I didn't actually check the population statistics before I made that whole argument about how taking Crimea out of the Ukraine will mean that they won't be, it says JRM 102 says Ukraine is split about 17% ethnic Russian and the rest is almost completely Ukraine. Well, like I said, I haven't checked those stats, and maybe Rand Paul was wrong, but he's not the only one I've heard make that argument that removing Crimea from the Ukraine will mean that a pro-Russian president will never be able to win in the Ukraine. But it sounds like if they're only 17% ethnic Russian, even with the Crimea, that it's hard to believe that Yanukovych won in the first place. I don't know, maybe they don't just vote along ethnic lines. I mean, I don't pretend to be an expert on Ukraine. Basically, I'm showing you the clips of people who are pretending to be the experts, and doing a little research to try to criticize them. But let me see if I can take one or two more quick questions, because I'm well over an hour and it's I think past my dinner time here. But let me see if I can go to one of these other. Hans Blitz says Stuxnet. So now there are computer viruses from the U.S. targeting Russian nuclear infrastructure? No, I don't think so. False equivalency. I think the Stuxnet is like a Russian. They were comparing what Russia's doing to the Ukraine to Stuxnet, which wasn't Stuxnet against Iran. Did I like it? I'm pretty sure Stuxnet was like a anti-Iran nuclear program computer virus, but I don't know. Am I wrong on that? It's not like I don't make mistakes on these live shows, so I think I am going to John Klein says, say good night to Sandy for me. Yeah, people haven't asked about Sandy for several shows, but Sandy's lying down right there. Sandy, come here. Sandy, come here. She's too sleepy. Won't get up. She's just lying down on the floor. So, but I will say good night to her for you. I'm going to finish up the show now. Like I said, for those of you who haven't seen it, if you this side, I think, if you look over in the sidebar, my latest video, Fox News blames Obama for Russian troops in the Ukraine, is up, and I think for those of you who like the edited, produced videos, it's one of the old Fox News bias videos, one of my more traditional videos. So check that out and give it a thumbs up, and add it to your favorites and share it on social media if you want me to keep making those kinds of videos. The more views they get, the more likely I am to be able to keep making them. So do that if you will. And I should be making a video about a local issue, about my local sheriff and how my local media didn't cover his breaking of the law on undocumented immigrants very well, and that should be coming up sometime this week, I hope. But anyway, that's the end of Liberal Viewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thank you for joining me. For my viewers here in the U.S. Who are experiencing daylight saving time, who all lost an hour, I hope you enjoy the end of your kind of tiring weekend. At least it's been tiring for me, and for my viewers in Europe and around the world. I hope you enjoy the beginning of your week. I hope I made your weekend or your beginning of your week a little more informed by picking out all these clips from the corporate media here in the United States. I hope you enjoyed the clips I picked out, and I hope you'll keep joining me, like the 130 of you who have joined me for the show, and the people who watch it as a recorded show. I appreciate all of you commenting and viewing the video, and I guess I'll be seeing you all around the internet.